Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole from the 4th District of Oklahoma, and we're starting a little new communications effort here to talk to you about topical issues, what's happened in Washington that's important in a week, doing it obviously here from my personal office, and hopefully this will give you a little better feel for what Congress is actually up to and doing. Probably the big issue this week was so-called Medicare for All. I always call that a wonderful phrase that frankly hides a really bad idea. The Rules Committee had a hearing on this earlier this week. Pretty unusual for the Rules Committee to do that. The Rules Committee normally deals with legislation that other committees have produced and then put with it something called a rule, which literally just puts in the number of amendments that will be allowed, the amount of time that we can be debated, whether or not the legislation is subject to what are called points of order. And the Rules Committee is run by the Speaker. It's only a 13-member committee, the second smallest in Congress. The Speaker appoints 9 members directly. The Minority Leader appoints 4. I'm the leading Republican on the Rules Committee. So anytime we have a vote, they have a 9-4 advantage, and every member's there personally at the request of either the appointment of either the Speaker or the Leader, which means they're going to pretty much vote that way. And frankly, it's understood if you do not support the Speaker's position, you resign from the Rules Committee. It's that important, that closely linked to the Speaker and on the minority side to the current Republican leader. So for us to have a full-blown hearing is very unusual, and it tells you how much importance Speaker Pelosi put on Medicare for All. This is a signature issue inside the Democratic conference, but also an issue that causes a great deal of controversy. Again, the title sounds wonderful, Medicare for All, and when Americans hear that title, they quite often say, well, I'm for that. That sounds like a great idea, because Medicare is a very popular program. What they don't tell you when they use that phrase is if we move to that system, first, everybody that's on a private insurance plan, that's about 173 million Americans, would be kicked off their insurance plans within 2 years, whether they wanted to be or not. That meant if you had an employer-based plan that you liked, that was working for you, wouldn't matter. You'd have to give it up and go into a one-size-fits-all government program. The second thing they don't tell you, if you're already on Medicare, but you have Medicare Advantage, you'd have to give that up too. That's about another 22 million Americans that would lose a plan that they literally designed for themselves and they think works for them. Finally, they also don't tell you how expensive it's going to be. Currently, the current estimates are it would be a minimum of 32 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars more over the next 10 years. To give you some idea of what that means, right now, the federal government in all of its spending, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, everything it does, spends around $4.5 trillion a year. This would increase that to $7.7 trillion a year overnight. So there would be a massive tax increase that would be put into the system. And again, you would have one-size-fits-all designed by the federal government, kind of take it or leave it healthcare. So it's really a very controversial idea, and while a lot of Democrats like it, over 100 of them co-sponsored right now, and 6 or 7 Democratic candidates running for president have embraced this idea. There's a lot of pushback. There's very little Republican support for this magnitude of change, and frankly, a lot of Democrats are also skeptical that you could do something like this and actually get people to sign off on it, let alone get it done within 2 years. So we had our first hearing, and one of our demands is, hey, this hearing ought to also take place in other committees. The Rules Committee has very little jurisdiction here, very little expertise. We deal with the process of legislating. We don't deal with the substance of legislation very often. In something like this, when you're talking about health care for every single American, the Committee of Jurisdiction should be Energy and Commerce, should be Ways and Means. Those are the committees that actually deal with health care legislation most frequently, and also the Committee of Education and Labor. Those 3 committees have most of the jurisdiction. We actually only have jurisdiction over less than 1% of this bill. So I think the Speaker clearly wanted to keep control of the narrative, wanted to stack it in favor of the proponents, which it is, because again, we don't have seats there proportional to our representation. We have a built-in minority that we have less than a third of the seats on the committee itself. So It's a pretty stacked deck. We had some good witnesses, I have to say, some testimony, but the proponents of Medicare for All had five witnesses. We were only allowed to have two. I think, frankly, our two witnesses did an awesome job of pointing out both the policy implications and particularly the cost and whether or not this could be sustainable. So I think you'll hear a lot more talk about this. You certainly will in the presidential campaign with the various candidates running for president. You certainly will legislatively, because it looks like we've succeeded in convincing at least one of the major committees to also hold a hearing on this. But at the end of the day, I think the longer you examine this, the less attractive you'll find the concept. And that certainly seemed to work that way in our hearing this week.